Hello and welcome to our webinar, A Duet of Opera Tours. My name is Victoria Hanson and I'm the Programme Manager here at the New York Times for Times Journeys. During the next hour, you will hear about our new tour, Opera and the Splendid Culture of Austria, enjoying operas written by Richard Strauss and Giuseppe Verdi, as well as attending the Vienna State Opera Ball. And secondly, our autumn trip to the Emerald Isle for Ireland's famous opera festival in Wexford. But before we dive into the specifics and I introduce you to Fred Plotkin, the time-selected expert who accompanies both of these departures, why travel with the New York Times? Well, first and foremost, on each of our 70-plus departures, you will be accompanied by either a New York Times journalist or subject matter specialist. We offer a programme of both small group tours and specialist cruises, working with cruise lines of the likes of Holland and America and Cunard, and for our small group tours, you'll be travelling with no more than 25 guests. We visit destinations that tell a story, locations as diverse as Cuba, Provence, Myanmar, and Austria. And we offer you exclusive access with the opportunity, depending on the trip, to escape the crowds with tours that include after-hours entrance to museums or the best seats in the house. So without further ado, let's head to Europe and the splendid culture of Austria and look at some of the main trip highlights. Well, of course, Fred Plotkin himself, who travels with our group, is definitely one of the main highlights. He'll be talking about the operas and also the culinary delights, sharing both formal and informal lectures and pre-performance discussions with you. You will attend a performance at the Vienna Philharmonic Orchestra in Salzburg at the Grosses Festspielhaus. You will attend 3 operas, Strauss's Arabella, starring Anya Harteros, and Verdi's Rigoletto, with superstar Juan Diego Flores, both at the Vienna State Opera House, and La Traviata at the Wiener Volksoper. Take part in the exclusive Vienna State Opera Ball, an elegant annual event, and explore the life and legacy of Mozart in Salzburg and Vienna, as well, of course, of savouring the sophisticated food and wine of Austria. So without further ado, let's introduce Fred Plotkin. Well, with over 40 years' experience in the opera industry, he is one of the world's foremost opera experts. He has lectured, taught, consulted, and held artistic or managerial roles at some of the top opera companies, including La Scala, the Metropolitan Opera, Covent Garden, and the Salzburg Festival. He's the author of numerous books and articles on opera and classical music, including Opera 101, a complete guide to learning and loving opera. He is a frequent visitor to Europe and has immersed himself in the continent's rich culture. And I'm delighted to say that Fred was recently named a Cavaliere of the Republic of Italy, which is their equivalent of the Italian knighthood. And that was only announced last month. So I'm delighted to introduce Fred not only as the presenter of today's webinar, but also as the time-selected specialist who accompanies both of our tours. Welcome, Fred.
Thank you, Tori, and Grüß Gott, as they would say in Salzburg to all of you, Servus, as they would say in Vienna. Now, why Austria? Austria, per capita, it's a country of 7 million people, so less than New York City, has more great music, opera, visual arts than any country in the world per capita. It is a beautiful country. It has a rich and complex history, not all of it pretty, but all of it fascinating, and all of it has fed into Austrian cultural output. You may think of it just as very traditional music, such as Mozart. Not that there's anything wrong with Mozart. He's maybe the greatest composer ever, and Haydn and later Beethoven. But Austria has always been a leader. It's been cutting edge. So what you want to see now in terms of opera, music, visual arts, you go to Vienna to see it. And so this trip will combine Salzburg and Vienna. And some people have asked me, why are we going in the winter? And I have a good answer for that. Mozart was born January 27, 1756 in Salzburg. And every year for a week, they do magnificent music, not just by Mozart, but by other composers. The greatest performers in the world come to Salzburg for the week. And then we go to Vienna, where the Opera Ball takes place every year. This is one of the most famous, exciting, thrilling, must do, once in a lifetime experiences is to go to the Opera Ball in Vienna. And they both this year fell within a week. So we could celebrate Mozart and his legacy in Salzburg and then go to Vienna for fantastic art, food, and culture, culminating on your last night with the Opera Ball. So that's the overview of the trip. Let's start with Salzburg. Salzburg is on the Salzach River, hence the name. And where does the name come from? It was founded by the Romans because the Romans went wherever salt was. Salt was the great currency of the Roman Empire. If you think of the word salary, it comes from salt. Everybody was paid in salt. And the Romans had a knack for finding salt. And there was a cave in Salzburg that was absolutely full of it. So it's a city of Roman foundation with a beautiful crossroads, with magnificent riverfront setting, cathedrals, restaurants. It's very historic. And that is where Mozart was born in 1756. You would think that it might become touristy. And it's not touristy. It is a fantastic destination that retains its character. The only touristy thing about it is something that the people of Salzburg scarcely know. 50 years ago, the movie The Sound of Music came out. It was filmed around Salzburg. And yes, it's a very famous film, it's beautiful music and so on. But if you ask someone from Salzburg, tell me about the music of Salzburg, they never say The Sound of Music. They say Mozart and they say other composers and all the great performers who come there. The food is terrific in Salzburg. I think of Austria as a horizontal country, and Salzburg is closer to Germany and northern Italy. There are those influences. Vienna, in the eastern part of the country, is also near Italy, but also Hungary near the Adriatic on the Danube River. And therefore, the food is equally great, but very different in Vienna. For example, Salzburg makes wonderful beer. Vienna makes wonderful wine. We will experience both. Our hotel, the Goldener Hirsch, has been on this street, the Getreidegasse, for more than 600 years. It has welcomed travelers coming from north and south, from east and west, because Salzburg has always been a crossroads. The Goldener Hirsch is the oldest hotel I've ever stayed in. It's very, very charming, very welcoming. Each room is distinct. You would never equate it with a contemporary hotel where every room looks the same. There is furniture in it that's 200, 300, 400 years old. It's a very intimate hotel. All the great musicians have stayed there. I've seen Leonard Bernstein there, Herbert von Karajan, Claudio Abbado, and we will likely see musicians there who are performing in Salzburg when we are staying at the Goldener Hirsch. It also has an excellent restaurant where we'll eat our first night. So I will take us walking around Salzburg to walk in the footsteps of Mozart. He was born on the Getreidegasse, just down the street from our hotel. He, when he got a little older, moved with his family across the river to something now called the Wohnhaus, the house where Mozart lived. And it's a museum about Mozart. And you will find that he's not been commercialized too much. They could have done a lot more. The only commercial thing that you'll see are Mozart Kugel. These are chocolates that are filled with pistachio, with almond, with hazelnut, and I defy you to resist them. So we will sweeten our visit with Mozart Kugel. We will also sweeten our visit with rather magnificent music. 5 minutes from the hotel is a theater called the Grosses Festspielhaus, the Great Festival Hall. The Vienna Philharmonic, once a year, comes in the winter from Vienna to Salzburg to play at the Grosses Festspielhaus on the concluding week of the Mozart birthday week. But they don't necessarily play Mozart. In this case, they'll be playing a concert of Felix Mendelssohn with the great conductor, the legendary conductor Nikolaus Harnoncourt, and the wonderful soprano Dorothea Rochman. If you've gone to opera in New York, you've heard her at the Met. She did a great concert this year at Carnegie Hall. But she's one of those artists, and there are many, who seldom cross the Atlantic because there's so much in demand in Europe that they don't have to travel elsewhere. So it's a rare opportunity to hear not only Nikolaus Harnoncourt, who's a legend, but also Dorothea Rochman. And we do have to eat. And I know that Wiener Schnitzel would suggest to you that it's from Vienna. It is. You could also say it's from Milan because the Austrian Empire dominated northern Italy in the 19th century. So nobody will ever agree, did the fried cutlet of veal in breading come from Milan or from Vienna? I will pass on that, but I will say to you that it's consumed in Salzburg. It is much more delicate, more sophisticated, more delicious than anything that we've seen in the States. So it's really a specialty and worth trying. South of Salzburg are wonderful apple groves. And so Apfelstrudel is found throughout Austria, but is delicious in Salzburg because of the local apples. A brief explanation of strudel. It arrived in Austria, we know the date, in 1683, when the Turks were attacking the gates of Vienna, and they were repulsed, and they had to run, and they left sacks of coffee, and they left phyllo dough. And the Austrians figured out how to brew the coffee. They filled the phyllo dough with apples or with apricots, and the result was strudel. And it gastronomically, socially changed everything we know about Austria, because in Austria, not only do you eat well, but you pause in a cafe, you talk, you read. Great political discussions happen in cafes in Austria. You will notice that there are free newspapers to be read in all the Austrian cafes. You don't go for a quick espresso the way you might in Italy, but you go to a cafe for an hour, for 2 hours, and this is part of Austrian culture. So apple strudel is not just a delicious dessert, it is a lot more. After 2 nights in Salzburg, we will get on a bus. We will travel east to Vienna. We will stop somewhere for delicious coffee and cake, because one must. And then we get to Vienna, and we will be staying right across the street, 3 minutes from the Vienna State Opera, in the Bristol Hotel. The Bristol Hotel opened in 1892. It's one of the great hotels of Europe. And it helps that it's right across the street from the Vienna State Opera, so that if you want to nap before a performance, if you want to spend time dressing, whatever you'd like to do, we won't have to worry about rushing to get to the opera house. So the State Opera is usually ranked among the top 3 or 4 in the world, along with the Met, along with La Scala, along with Covent Garden in London, and the Paris Opera. And everyone in his or her lifetime who loves opera wants to get to the Vienna State Opera. It is indeed legendary. And on 2 nights there, you will come to know the theater. I will teach you about the theater, its history, its particular traditions, and its relationship to the city. It sits right at the most central spot in the entire town of Vienna, not the city hall, not the government buildings. The central place where everybody passes in Vienna is the opera house, and your hotel will be right there. And on our first night, we will get to hear Giuseppe Verdi's very famous, beloved, I would say perfect opera, Rigoletto, which he wrote in 1851. It premiered in Venice, and it became arguably his most successful opera, along with La Traviata, and it will star, in the role of the Duke, Juan Diego Flores. American listeners know him well because he's appeared all over our country. He appears in London and Barcelona. He's one of the top opera stars in the world. It is rare for him to sing the Duke of Mantua. It's actually a departure for him to do this. So therefore, I picked this performance because it's a very rare opportunity to hear Juan Diego Flores sing this famous role. We will have Olga Peretiaco as Gilda and the excellent Carlos Alvarez as Rigoletto. So it will be a very important night. And right after that, when the performance ends, you will applaud, of course, and then you'll walk right across the street and go right to bed after a long but wonderful first day in Austria, in Vienna. The next day, we're going to walk around town a bit. I'm going to continue to teach you about Mozart, and we will visit the house not far from St. Stephen's Cathedral, not far from a hotel, where Mozart lived when he wrote The Marriage of Figaro. What's very interesting about this house is that it really reveals to you the man. It's not just the space where he lived, but it's actually who he was, what he did. Did you know, for example, that Mozart was a very famous gambler? He made a lot of money, but he lost a lot of money. That's why we think of him as a poor, struggling composer. Had he not been a gambler, he probably would have been wealthier. And you will see the room where he gambled. You will see the cards that he gambled with. It's a wonderful explanation of who the man was. And I will actually devote a fair amount of time that day to teaching you the things about Mozart that go beyond the famous and the obvious. Now, Vienna is not just Mozart, obviously. It's a city where Haydn, Beethoven, Gluck, Schubert, Johann Strauss Sr. and Jr., Brahms, Bruckner, Mahler, all called home. There is no city in the world, not even Paris, which would be second, that can claim so many great composers, so many people who changed the course of music history, who changed the course of culture. And what you will find about the Viennese, that even if they're not as big an opera fan as I am and as you are, is that they take great pride in the fact that their city has been the crucible where all of this world changing culture happened. So that is something that you're going to feel. We're going to have lunch that day in a restaurant called the Schwarze Kamel, the Black Camel, which dates back to the early 17th century. Most of the composers I just named like to eat there, especially Beethoven, but also Haydn. And in the Schwarze Kamel, they have something called the Heimat meal, which means the homeland meal, where Austrians who have been away, traveling, working, whatever, when they come back to Vienna, they go right to the Schwarze Kamel because they want to taste all of their flavors that they love. So on that day, at that lunch, you're going to have several wonderful Viennese specialties. Then in the evening, by the way, that's St. Stephen's Cathedral, which is the dome, the main cathedral of Vienna, and we'll visit there as well. It's near the Schwarze Kamel in Mozart's house. But in the evening, we're going back to the Vienna State Opera for Richard Strauss's Arabella. Arabella is set in Vienna. It's about a Viennese girl and her family, and the star of Arabella is Anya Harteros. Now, I know that many people have not heard of her, and fewer have heard her, and there's a reason for that. She's from near Munich. She lives in Central Europe. She sings all the time in Munich, in Salzburg, in Vienna, and occasionally in Berlin, Paris, and Milan. That's it. Now, Anya Harteros, this year, 2015, at the International Opera Awards, was named the top female opera singer in the world. She is stupendous. I have seen her in Central Europe. She appeared once at the Met in La Traviata and once at the Met in Don Giovanni, and she was amazing. And while Juan Diego Flores may be more famous, and he's a marvelous artist, I think that once you see Anya Harteros as the Viennese girl Arabella, you'll understand what all the people who have seen her rave about. Vienna, as I said, is also a city with incredible art treasures. It was the city that was for many years the capital of the Austrian and later the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And the Habsburgs gathered phenomenal art treasures, not just from Austria, but Italy, Titian's, Michelangelo's, all the great artists, plus Spain, Velázquez's, plus the great Netherlandish artists, everyone, a lot of the great paintings that you've seen in art history class or in books are there live in Vienna in the Kunsthistorisches Museum. So I like to spend a lot of time there. You can too. Now, how will this happen? For the 3 days after that first day I described, you will have something called the Vienna card. The Vienna card will enable you to travel for free all over the city of Vienna on its wonderful streetcars that can take you wherever you need to go very quietly, very quickly, very efficiently. It will also provide you with many discounts and sometimes free admissions to some of these great attractions, one of them being the Kunsthistorisches Museum. You notice that there's a dome right there. There's a restaurant below the dome that's one of the best restaurants in Austria. And I like to go there for lunch. When you get tired walking over the museum, you go back to the restaurant. You have delicious food. You have amazing cake. Try the poppy seed cake with chocolate and strawberry. And then you go back to visiting art again. Sigmund Freud is from Vienna. He was born in 1856, so exactly 100 years after Mozart. And Freud, more than any figure of the 19th century, even Wagner, changed the way we think about ourselves, about human behavior, about the world. And Dr. Freud influenced all the creative artists of Vienna, and not only. And you can go to the Freud Museum. It's not too far from the Bristol Hotel. You can also see where his patients went. You can see the famous couch where he would have them lie down and do their stream of consciousness explaining of their issues. And I think you'll find that it is very moving because you understand that this man, who was a doctor, who was a scientist, inadvertently changed the way every human being thinks about his or her behavior, about his life, and so on. And it's a very moving and fascinating experience to go there, and I do recommend that. It's something you can do with your Vienna card. Similarly, the Belvedere Palace is worth a visit. It is one of several palaces in town that belong to the Habsburgs, but it is also the museum in the world that has the best collection of the paintings of Gustav Klimt. Klimt being an Austrian, he lived in the late 19th century and early 20th century. He radically changed art in terms of color, texture, the sensuality, the subtext. He was profoundly influenced by Freud, as were just about every artist in Vienna. And this is a rare opportunity, if you like Klimt, and everyone does, to see almost all of his great works. There are a few in Klagenfurt, there are a few in New York, there are a couple in London, but really, if you're interested in Klimt, you could spend much of a day seeing his works of art, and that will be your choice. On the third evening, what we're going to do is we're going to meet up in a museum called the MAK, M-A-K, which is the Museum of Applied Arts. This is not it, that's the Vienna State Opera. And the Museum of Applied Arts is where all the great works of the Jugendstil movement were gathered. This movement began in Vienna around 1900 and completely changed the way people lived. In other words, their housewares, their furniture, their clothing, the drinking glasses, the cups, everything, the chairs. There's a room there that's filled with chairs, and you'll understand how the roots of modern design, the pioneers of modern design, almost all came from Vienna. And this museum has one of the great restaurants in Vienna, one of the top tables, Österreicher in Mach. So that evening, after we have a private tour of the museum, we're going to have another really fantastic meal in Vienna. Then the next night or the next day, you can travel around town even more. I would recommend that you go to the Third Man Museum. If you know the film not by Orson Welles, by David Lean, starring Orson Welles and Joseph Cotton and Alida Valli, it was made in the 1940s. It's a classic. And just this week, they came out with a new, pristine, updated version. It's one of the great films based on a novel by Graham Greene. And there's a movie theater about 5 minutes from our hotel that permanently shows the third man. But now they've also opened a third man museum. In the evening, we're going to gather at a local, very charming restaurant for dinner, and then go to the Wiener Volksopera, which is the other opera company of Vienna, and see Verdi's La Traviata, always a classic. It's a much more intimate opera house, so your experience will not be of going to a grand opera house, but more the way most people in Europe historically went to the opera. So it's a very nice experience. And the next day, our last day in Austria, you will have time on your own. We're going to meet for a really good lunch. I'm planning for us to have something called Tafelspitz. Tafelspitz is Viennese boiled beef that comes with a broth with beautiful vegetables, with cream spinach. You finish off with Sachertorte. This is your classic Vienna meal on the day that you go to the Opera Bowl. Then we will have a rest. Then we will dress. Then we will walk from the Bristol Hotel to the Vienna State Opera, where there will be waltzing, there will be feasting, there will be dancing, there will be singing. It's just an unrivaled, hedonistic, and pleasurable event that you will talk about for the rest of your life, and to me seemed a wonderful climax to this rather fascinating, very diverse visit to Austria that we will be doing for a week.
Well, thank you very much for that, Fred. I know that I'd like to start dancing lessons so that I could attend the Opera State Ball myself. I think it'd be a magnificent experience. And I had no idea that the word salary originated from the word salt, or that Mozart was a gambler. So there's an awful lot of information there that I need to learn from you. So just to give a quick recap before we move on to the Emerald Isle, Opera and the Splendid Culture of Austria is our new tour for 2016. It starts January the 29th and runs through to February the 5th. We only have 25 spaces available on the trip. So that's 8 days, and it's $8,995 per person. And there's a single supplement of $1,475. Now, we will be taking questions both about this trip and the other one towards the end. So if you have any questions, please write them down now. There is a panel in the right-hand side that you can submit them when you're ready. And of course, you can, if you'd like, you can rush to the phones and contact our reservation specialists on 855-698-7979 if you'd like to book. So with that said, we're going to be moving on from Austria and over to the Emerald Isle and our tour in the autumn this year for Ireland's famous opera festival. So some of the trip highlights: Fred continues to run our opera programmes, but you'll be attending the 3 excellent and diverse operas of Coanga, Le Pré aux Clercs and Guglielmo Ratcliffe. You'll meet one of the festival's conductors and stage directors. You'll visit the Fringe Festival. You'll enjoy a gala concert at the National Opera House and attend a performance by Tara O'Rourke, Ireland's leading opera singer. And so, as well as all of the operas and the festivals, you'll also visit Powerscourt Estate, Ireland's most beautiful historic house and gardens. So, Fred, take it away.
So, Wexford. A lot of people have said to me, opera in Ireland? Really? Really? And I've said, yes, really. This trip, actually, we announced a while back, and a lot of people have signed up. There are a couple of more spots, so that's why we're mentioning it now. It is very special. The Wexford Festival was founded 59 years ago, and it has achieved a unique status in the opera world. And the reason for that is that it's distinguished by 2 things. They only do operas that it seems no one has ever heard of, but that are great lost works that ask that they be brought back. And in addition, they search the world for talented young artists who make their debut, their international debut in Wexford, and then go on to great careers. So Luciano Pavarotti made his international debut in Wexford. So did Morella Freni. So did Angela Mead. So did Juan Diego Flores, who's now starring in Vienna and New York and elsewhere. So Wexford is very special, and also, being Ireland, very beautiful, very charming. The National Opera House, you would think, would be in Dublin, but actually not. It's in Wexford. And they used to do operas in a small theater, but this one opened a couple of years ago. purpose-built for opera, which is a rare thing even in continental Europe, where theaters have multi-uses. This theater was built for opera, and it's a perfect place to go to opera. And if you're looking at the auditorium now and you see the first few rows, I can assure you, because I've checked, that that's where we have our seats. So we're going to have splendid seats for these performances. Now, they're doing 3 operas this year. I actually know 2 of them. The one that I do not know at all, so I'm going to learn for you before we go, is Le Pré aux Clairs by Ferdinand Hérold. All I can tell you is that it was produced originally at the Opéra Comique in Paris, and this production that we will see was produced at the Opéra Comique a few months ago. It got wonderful reviews, and I'm studying it now, and it looks great. Second opera is Coanga by Frederick Delius. My father was a great Delius lover, and in fact, I'm named for 3 Fredericks, one of them being Frederick Delius. Not many people can say that. Delius was British, but his family had a huge fruit company. They were the biggest fruit company in England. And he was sent to northern Florida as a 20-year-old to learn the citrus industry and to become the exporter back to Britain of oranges and grapefruits and lemons from Florida. While there, Delius discovered the music of African Americans. And Coanga is based on his experience as a very young man in Florida. He also wrote music called The Florida Suite. And even before Porgy and Bess introduced African American music and rhythms and cadences to opera, we had Coanga by Frederick Delius. It was about slavery, it was about liberation. It's a wonderful work. And I think it's just great that it's being presented in Wexford, having been lost to time for many, many years. And then there is Guglielmo Ratcliffe by Mascagni, great Italian composer. What is particular about this opera is that it has one of the most difficult tenor roles in all of opera. I don't know who our tenor will be, but part of the reason it's not done very often is you cannot find a tenor who's up to the task of performing it. But the music is terrific. I'll be glad to share it with you. A friend of mine, Francesco Ciluffo, is the conductor of Guglielmo Ratcliffe. Francesco is from Turin in Italy. He is a composer of operas in addition to being a conductor. He is very much in demand in Italy. He studied in Great Britain. He speaks perfect English. And as I said to you, when they want great artists to come for their international debut, they tend to bring them to Wexford. And Francesco will be conducting Guglielmo Ratcliffe. And we will also have time with him to discuss the opera, to discuss the opera scene today. So the questions that you have about what's going on in the opera world, I'll be glad to answer. But I think that you would enjoy Francesco's perspective as well. So that's on the program. Tara Arot, unless you live in Washington, D.C., or Munich, or Ireland, or England, you probably have not heard. She is Ireland's leading opera star. She's still a very young woman. She is a mezzo-soprano. She studied at the Royal Irish Academy of Music with a teacher named Veronica Dunn, and she is now resident in Munich, and she sings all the leading roles, the mezzo-soprano roles in Munich. She sang in Der Rosenkavalier as Octavian at the Glyndebourne Festival. She just made her American debut at the Washington National Opera at the Kennedy Center, starring in Rossini's La Cenerentola Cinderella. She will make her Carnegie Hall debut on December 4th, 2015. We will hear her before in a concert in Wexford. This is a very rare opportunity and the perfect example of the Wexford experience of discovering top talent at the very beginning of their careers. I took this picture. It was part of my job to do that for you. I went to Ireland to do research. Irish food is very, very, very much better than these stereotypes would have it. There is wonderful organic food. There is fresh fish from the seas around the island, beautiful vegetables, potatoes, of course, but also many greens. You're going to find the cookery is incredible, but we will also find a place for a traditional Irish breakfast. Um, since we announced this trip, I have structured a lot more our last day, which is in Dublin, because I thought that everybody would want to go to Dublin. Some people on their own are staying on for a couple of days to do the traditional Dublin touristic experience. And if you've not been to Dublin, you might want to do that. However, on our day together, we're doing something very distinct. We will go for a master class, a private class for us at the Royal Irish Academy of Music, where Tara Arot studied. We will be watching Veronica Dunn, the legendary teacher, Ireland's leading voice teacher. She sang at La Scala in the 1950s. She's really quite the figure. And then I will be interviewing her. We'll have an informal conversation. And this will give you an idea about Irish opera talent, about how opera singers are trained. You can see it for yourself. This is a window into the world of opera that most people don't get to see, even if they know and love opera. We will check into our hotel. We'll have a lovely meal together. And then we're going to the National Concert Hall, where that night, Leif Ove Ansnes, the Norwegian pianist, who's one of the 3 or 4 top pianists in the world, is giving a concert, and we will be attending that. So our day in Dublin will be a music day, and many people will fly home the next day. But if you choose to stay on, you'll be able to do that, to visit Trinity College, to visit the Book of Kells, to have a nice glass of Guinness, to do whatever you want to do in Dublin, see the home of James Joyce, see all the Irish writers of the Irish Writers Museum, and just enjoy the lovely hospitality of the wonderful Irish people. So I look forward to having you there.
Thank you, Fred. And we very much appreciate you going to Ireland and taking those photos and sampling the food on our behalf. And I'm sure that those of you listening much appreciate that too, and actually looking forward to sampling some yourself. So as you can see here, we've got up our frequently asked questions slide, because there are a number of questions that we get asked time and time again. So I think it's important just to cover those off before we move on to questions from yourself. So as I mentioned earlier, we do have this panel in the right-hand side where you can type in any questions that you have, either about the tour or about the operas themselves. Take advantage of Fred being here today and ask him that question you've always been wanting to. So over to some of these frequently asked questions. Is international airfare included? We found that quite often our guests like to use their air miles to purchase their flights, because it gives them more flexibility to do that. So we don't include international air. And as Fred alluded to, in terms of the seats, for the performances, we offer the best category performances available. And so, as Fred mentioned, for the opera, one of the Irish opera trips, it's the front row seat. And some of our guests that came back on an earlier performance actually found themselves sitting next to Armani. So that's pretty special. So obviously we can't promise that every single time, but it just goes to show the quality of the seats that we do provide for our guests. Now, how active is the tour? Well, of course, the focus is on having energy for the operas themselves. They can be long days on opera days, so we want to make sure that you can serve all of your energy to do that. So we don't expect you to be walking miles and miles every day. And is the tour suitable for single travellers? Of course. So many Times Journeys guests are on their own. They come along, they're with like-minded people, they make lifelong friends. They're in touch, quite often they're in touch with them on their return, meet up frequently. So yes, please do book. You'll meet new people and have a fantastic time. So with that being said, I'm just going to open up our screen here and see if there are any questions that have been asked. One of the questions that's been posted is around the location of hotels, and this sort of feeds into how much walking we expect you to do. So as Fred mentioned, for the Austria trip, the hotels are literally between 3 and 5 minutes away from the opera houses, so very, very close, literally a stone's throw, and the Vienna State Opera being right in front of the Bristol Hotel there.
And the same in Wexford.
Oh,
we'll be at the Talbot
fantastic.
Hotel, which is 5 minutes from the Opera House.
Very important. So that's something that we get asked and wanted to bring out there. And you might have noticed there is a price differential as well between the Austria trip and the Irish opera trip. And this is primarily down to the cost of the tickets for these different performances. We want to make sure that you do get the best seats in the house, and because of that, it does unfortunately increase the price. However, we hope that you'll consider it very well worth it.
And in Vienna, it's attendance at the Opera Ball, which is a one-time-a-year thing. It's very hard to get into, and therefore one has to pay to do it. And so that's partly reflected in the price. But believe me, anyone who loves opera wants to go to the Opera Ball in Vienna. I do want to add one more thing. I forgot to mention in Wexford that in addition to the 3 operas and to the Tara Arot recital, we're going to a gala concert on the Sunday afternoon. So that is another musical event. We have a lot of music on this Irish trip, and people who are very, very into music, this is a great trip to go on.
Fantastic. Well, I think that's covered off all of the questions that have been asked and our frequently asked questions. Of course, if you do have any other questions, please do call our reservation centre. So just to give you a quick recap again about these 2 trips. So we have our Opera and the Splendid Culture of Austria tour, which departs January the 29th. It's 8 days and it's $8,995. And then we have Ireland's famous opera festival, which departs in October this year, October the 24th. It starts in Ireland. It's 7 days, and that's from $6,295. So as I mentioned, if you do have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact our specialist on 855-698-7979. And we look forward to welcoming you to Austria. I won't practice my German now, I'll leave that to Fred, or also welcoming you to Ireland in just a few months' time. So we look forward to seeing you soon.
Wir sehen uns in Österreich. I'll see you in Dublin and Wexford.
Thanks, Fred.
Thank you.